Marty Wasznicky. As Katie mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Product Development here at Neudesic. I came to Neudesic roughly about 2 years ago from Microsoft, where I worked in the Connected Systems division. Now, that team was responsible for development of most of the distributed technologies that Microsoft ships today. At that time, I was also responsible for the development of the Microsoft ESB Guidance, which was recently rebranded the BizTalk ESB Toolkit. Now, with me today is Christian Martinez. Christian's my principal field engineer. Now, he's been working with these technologies as well for as long as I can remember. Christian works directly with our customers and ensure their successful utilization of Neuron ESB. Now, it's really our pleasure today to have this opportunity to talk to you about how you can effectively leverage an enterprise service bus within your environment. As you can see, we'd like to cover a few items on our presentation today, everything from why we're here to effectively using the Neuron ESB in a variety of ways so you can deliver solutions for your customers faster and better than you did yesterday. So first off, let's take a look at this slide, the state of the CIO. This is basically our CIO survey slide. Now, as you can see, integrating systems and processes have been pretty high on the list of priorities, pretty much most everyone. I think we're having a few difficulties on just hearing. Let me see if I can do a little better job here. Okay, so this has been pretty much a priority for everyone. Security and providing new services and products, specifically with web service technologies, you can see that also continues to remain high on the list. An enterprise service architecture, an SOA, remains top of this agenda. Interestingly enough, we find that the enterprise service bus solutions envelop all aspects of these priorities. Now, when you think about this, it's probably because we recognize that consumers of these capabilities, be it internal or external, your customers or partners, and enabling these consumers to utilize services more effectively, better, faster, and cheaper will give us a leg up on the competition. We're here because these items have always been a challenge for us for a long time. It seems like they continue to remain a challenge. However, as we're going to show you, deploying an enterprise service bus today can dramatically improve your ability to solve these challenges. The need to get to the market faster, cheaper, and better, even enabling consumers and customers more easily without breaking changes within your own organization. Today, our focus is on effectively leveraging the enterprise service bus, discuss some ways that we can use Neuron ESB to achieve the goals. Well, let's take a moment. Let's look at some of these challenges and the priorities. So we have our SLA Challenges slide up. Now, when you think about the previous slide, many look at SOA as really the solution for a lot of these things, to address every issue on that deck. Now, I think we found over time that SOA has a lot of promise, but it's challenging. Web service standards are maturing nicely, but they've become really, really complex. I think we've all seen that. Partly because the perception that they need to be complex to solve complex problems. But the consequence is there's more specialized knowledge needed, and some of the tools simply aren't there yet to help us. Visual Studio is great, but still not enough. What do we see developers doing? Looking at things like REST. So what do we get from this? We're finding developers are left to make a lot of independent decisions, wiring up web services. We're not seeing the reuse we'd like to see. We're not seeing the standards. We're not seeing the infrastructure. We're not seeing the management experience. And we're really seeing a low adoption rate. We're seeing now these projects taking not 6 months, but years. So it seems like the key is to make SOA approachable and easy for the average developer. This is one of the things we're really striving to do with Neuron ESB, and exactly why we've introduced things like the Enterprise Service Bus. Now, this next slide is kind of an introduction. I like this slide because it talks about the evolution of the enterprise service bus. When I think about the problems we've been trying to solve for the last couple of decades, think about just enterprise integration. That problem's been around for a long time. I think we have a lot of good middleware products out there now, and yet still, it seems to be a challenge. Message-oriented middleware, really to try to facilitate a lot of that integration. The event-driven paradigm has come about. Now, not all applications are event-driven today, and I think it's going to be a long time until we get there. But event-driven architecture provides a lot of promise. And then obviously the introduction of SOA. And we're finding SOA is really providing new interop boundaries to accomplish some of the things that we've struggled to do with enterprise integration. And now with message-oriented middleware, we can actually facilitate some of the SOA problems and provide solutions for these. So the enterprise service bus, really, when you think about it, it provides an operating system, an environment for services, as well as your back end, the integration, a common messaging fabric, and more so a long-term architectural pattern. Really what you want to be able to do is provide these infrastructure services where you need them, deploy them where you need them, and be able to manage these in a distributed environment. Even today, most ESBs don't have a concept of events, but if you can provide events within a bus, similar to what we do with Neuron, all of a sudden it's easy to tie things together. When an order gets updated in a system, hey, your GL should get updated. It's an event, and people understand that. So I like this slide a lot because this is about what the business is interested in, and I call this the 3 C's. When I think about why people adopt an enterprise service bus, it becomes very apparent. On the customer side, the business is interested in what? A 360-degree view. They bought a lot of back-end systems. They offer a lot of services. Typically, it's about tying these things together. At the end of the day, they want to be able to provide new features to their customers in a timely fashion so they can be competitive. With competitors, they want to beat on the market, but more so, be able to measure the effectiveness of these offerings. If they're going to penetrate new markets, they have to determine what things to offer and how fast they can offer those things. And can their organization deliver that capability in a timely fashion? Costs are also important. How long does it take to stand these things up for my customers? How much money does it cost to maintain these things? Is the ROI there? Now, on the operations side of the house, they have similar concerns. Right? They have to worry about the infrastructure required to deliver those solutions to the customers. You know, can I install this in 5 minutes, or is this going to take a week to install? Am I installing one software package, or really am I installing 30 different ones? And I have to keep all those versions in sync. How easy is it to deploy to different environments? And then providing that connectivity within the enterprise. Operations wants predictability, right? They want to know things are up, and they need to know when things are down. They need to know that they have a solution that they can scale out. Does the operations, do they want a solution that they have to scale out the 30 servers, or would they rather a solution that scales out to 2 servers and still performs? And then they've got to think about their long-term ROI when it comes to leveraging existing tools, leveraging existing resources, or even the recurring licensing and support. Now, it's interesting because then we look at what developers want. They really want to use .NET. They want to use familiar tool sets. They don't want to have to go out and learn specialized skills, because that's hard, right? The minute you start dipping into products, typically it's lots of specialized skills, going out, consulting resources, and new training. Customers and developers alike would like to use the skills that sit in their toolbox. And then we want developers to be productive. And they want to be productive. So being able to test easily, have the samples they need, see the results in real time, those are important. And no matter what, being able to customize what they have is important. Because nothing can sit every niche. The key to a good product or a good technology is in its extensibility. So on the Microsoft side, when we start looking at what Microsoft provides the customer today, some amazing tools in a platform. When you think about Visual Studio, the best .NET development platform out there, best development environment out there. BizTalk Server provides an amazing integration engine. And then you have tools and guidance. But still, there's things missing. Because this alone isn't an enterprise service bus, nor does it provide the functionality. And we know this from the calls that we get and from the challenges that customers are trying to still overcome. Some of these are low latency and high throughput messaging. If I'm going to front a public-facing website, I need to know that I can respond in a timely manner to my customers. I can scale to the size of my public audience. Maybe it's 100 concurrent users, maybe it's 300 concurrent users, maybe it's 1,000. I know I can get that sub-second latency time. I know I can function as a service gateway. I can virtualize my back end. So I can mediate and know that maybe Joe is going to be calling version 1 of this service and Mary will be routed to version 2, magically behind the scenes, no coupling to the website. Intuitive product integration, so it's more event-based. So that as a Microsoft CRM administrator, I don't have to know about the bus to publish events to the bus. And a low threshold of entry. I shouldn't need a lot of specialized skills to be effective. Because really what we want to do is stand up solutions quickly. So productivity becomes really, really important. So today, we find that Neuron ESB really fills in a lot of the blanks. We designed Neuron ESB specifically to fill in the gaps on the Microsoft platform where you need low latency and high throughput messaging, where you don't want to have to invest in specialized skill sets just to be productive in messaging and service design, and provide that service gateway and the pub sub infrastructure so you can tie your systems together really easily and be able to feed and monitor and manage your web portals. Now, a lot of customers choose Neuron ESB, and I looked at some of the reasons, and the top reasons really boil down to ease of use. We find most customers bootstrap themselves. They don't need a lot of training. They don't need a lot of time from us. We also look at low operational costs. Not just we're efficient on the hardware, but we really don't have a lot of hard dependencies on the back end. When you install our database, you can use the tools that you're familiar with, whether it's just SQL mirroring, backups, not a lot of infrastructure dependencies, and not a lot of software dependencies on third parties. So because we keep that operational footprint low, that means a greater long-term ROI, because we've just reduced the complexity. You can leverage your existing skills to be successful with Neuron. And being native to the Microsoft platform, being built on WCF and .NET, provides us an advantage that we can deliver back to our customers. And providing that flexibility and the price point really wraps it up into a nice package. Now, we have a number of customers today who use Neuron ESB. You can actually go to our website, www.neuronesb.com, and look at our customer page. Some of the customers that we have case studies on, we have quite a few up there, but BlueCrest being one of those. And as you can see, BlueCrest, a large financial company in the UK, they manage a multi-billion-dollar portfolio on behalf of their customers. Now, they had a lot of challenges. They can't tolerate any kind of trade loss. Their dev staff was unfamiliar with WCF and SOA. They needed JMS interop, so they chose Neuron ESB. Once they chose Neuron ESB, they were able to move their POC in production within 6 weeks with very little training. To them, it was important. If they're going to build a trading hub, it had to be reliable. They had to be able to stand it up quickly. Buffini is another fine example of a customer using Neuron ESB. Here, they've invested in Microsoft CRM, wanting to build real-time event-based integration from CRM to the Great Plains systems to another membership system and their portal, their company's online e-commerce site. They were able to do all of this with Neuron with zero code and very quickly. When they first looked at doing this, they looked for about a month to see if they could actually develop this themselves. After they realized the effort in development manpower, they came back to us. Now, I'd like to present Christian Martinez. He's going to take over the presentation now and give you more of a drill in the technology behind Neuron ESB. Christian?
Thank you, Marty. So up to now, we've kind of been showing you a high-level view of kind of why a business case would, why would you use an ESB? Now we're going to kind of drill in and kind of answer the question almost posed by the webcast of effectively using an ESB and how Neuron addresses the specific integration paradigms that an ESB serves. So the first thing to understand when working with Neuron is you need to understand the philosophy behind it. One of the primary driving forces that motivated even the creation of Neuron is we wanted a platform that worked with the .NET developer. Some platforms are pretty rigid in how they expect you to work, and they have a lot of overhead in how you have to do things. And frankly, most of ESB functionality was found outside the Microsoft world. So we said, we want something that a .NET dev would love to work with, and also it's easy to get started with. So when you go to put this on your box, it's about a 2-minute install. That's probably including download time or to actually get that on. It goes on a server desktop OS. It's built on things you already understand: .NET, WCF, and Workflow Foundation. No other magic, no native libs, nothing that is going to be all that revolutionary to a .NET developer. And finally, we have build in what you can anticipate, and then allow for easy customization extension when you can't. So we have a very easy adapter model that several customers build their own adapters within a week of getting the product. We'll show you how later on. And we have a code step. This was something that was added because a lot of times there's just not a standard interface, something you're dealing with. And what would be nice is if you could just shoehorn in at any point you need to the code you want to use without having to use some kind of strange language you've never seen before. So how do we provide these core services? What are the foundations? Well, the running services on your box are going to be Neuron ESB, which is our pub sub engine, and then you're going to have what's called the services kernel. Service kernel is very interesting. You can think of it as it can be an intelligent service router, custom hosting engine. It's essentially a kind of a super host with real-time workflow capabilities, and we'll get into that more. We have a .NET API for proprietary pub sub. Why would anybody use that? Well, most messaging and large messaging companies, they all use a messaging library, and a lot of times messaging requires state, and we tried to come up with a library that fit naturally in the .NET development environment. If you need to have interop, we have all kinds of WCF endpoints. So if you have clients that are not .NET, then use standard bindings, basic HTTP, any kind of binding that is open and WCF supports, which those of you who know WCF knows it supports an awful lot, we support. And then finally, we have adapters for the EAI model. EAI has not gone away, and many times you need to do traditional EAI connected to your bus, so why make them go outside your bus if you don't have to? So let's first drive into the pub subsystem. And how this helps you deploy your USB and decouple things. So at the top level, if you look, you'll see that the overriding driver, the paradigm, is a thing called topics. Topics are your primary abstraction. And those drive down through the stack, and they end up in one of three places, either an adapter, our .NET API, and or endpoints, traditional WCF endpoints. So how does a topic help you be effective with an ESB technology? A topic is your primary abstraction for the pub subsystem. Regardless of an ESB, regardless if it's called subjects, regardless, topics, queue, whatever the thing that they're calling, you're speaking on something. In Neuron, that abstraction is called a topic. And topics, an example of a topic should be ideally things that are in your business domain. So you might have a top level topic called accounting, and then under accounting you might have subtopics like GL, AP, AR. The idea is start with modeling the business at the topic level, and that will drive a topology that allows you to think in business terms or in terms of solutions rather than getting kind of in the nitty-gritty and ending up building something that's built off in technical interfaces. So once you have a topic, what communicates on a topic in the pub subsystem? Well, we call them parties, and we actually call them publisher and subscriber, even though in many times with pub sub, you're both a publisher and subscriber. And parties communicate on topics. Parties have an interesting property. They are where the processing occurs. And when I say the processing, I'm talking about real-time workflow processing and pipelines, which we'll get into later. This means that you can massively distribute load. As opposed to some products, all processing like transforms or calls occur on the server. Parties can be distributed among any number of desktops. So if you want, you can distribute your processing load. So how does one get on Neuron ESB? Well, there's three primary ways. You get on via a connector. A connector is going to look like just a WCF endpoint. You can use an adapter, which you either build or we ship, and that hooks up in standard traditional EAI fashion. Or you can use our API. The API is right there in front of you. It's not complicated, as you can see. Any serializable object goes on it. And about the only thing I'm not showing you in the API is hooking up a message handler, but I'm pretty sure most of you have seen plus equal if you're technical. Pipeline. So what are pipelines in Neuron? We'll do a slide later, but many times you're trying to accomplish a pattern, or you need to mediate, or you need to touch the message body, or you need to move on context. All of the things where you need to do something we encompass in pipelines. We come with a number of built-in pipelines for things you'd expect, like transforms and decisions and transactions. We have pipelines for impersonation. Is there a problem hearing? Just make sure. Okay. Sorry if people are having trouble hearing me. I think I'm talking into the phone. But with a pipeline, this is where you do your primary processing in Neuron. As you see, we have a code pipeline. And with a code pipeline, you can launch rockets. So we give you all kinds of options. Now moving to service hosting. Neuron ships what we call the Neuron Services kernel, The Neuron Services kernel is like a superhost or a super forwarder. It provides multiple isolation levels, including full worker processes, if you're familiar with the IIS model, and app domain isolation. You can move the app domains within the worker processes. Why would you do that? What does that buy you? What does that give you for a bus? With full process isolation, you can completely isolate the fault tolerance on any given application, and that would give you, of course, a robustness to your architecture. Within the Services Manager, you also get the ability to once again use pipelines, just like you do in the pub subsystem. The difference here is this is geared towards real-time services flow. In any given pub subsystem, the entire point of pub sub is to be able to decouple the publisher from the subscriber. In services, sometimes that's not the ideal. You may want to go from 1 to n endpoints, but you know the endpoints in advance, and you'd like to get there as quickly as possible. And you'd like to have zero possibility of getting 2 answers to a single question. When those apply, our Services Manager is ideal. It has various concepts along with the pipelines, including the notion of a broadcast step. So if you have an endpoint where you want to you want to send one message, you want it to go to 7 different places, but you don't necessarily want to associate it with a topic because you're not really pub subbing because you know the endpoints you're going to want to hit with it, you might consider the broadcast step because that's exactly what it's for. What about EAI? EAI has not gone away. It doesn't matter how many acronyms get put out. At some point, you have to hit a system that might not have web services, or web servers might not be the best way to interface with them. Out of the box, we ship a number of adapters, MSQGB2, data queues for the AS400, SMTP, pretty much traditional adapters you come to expect, and one you really haven't seen anywhere else, which is due to our rich BizTalk history, we kind of can automate BizTalk for you from Neuron. Some of the other things we provide are some integrations off shelf to systems that you might have in your environment that are fairly standard, like MOS, or one that we think is really powerful, our CRM Adapter, which provides this full event-driven functionality from CRM. So let's say you have something that you need to connect to. We don't provide an adapter, but you need to get stuff there anyways, and you want all the other functionalities of the bus. What do? Build your own. In Neuron, this is not an impossibility. As you can see, you're looking at the API. You override those methods. Those methods are fairly straightforward to override. Boom, your bus enabled. So now we get sort of to something kind of closer to effectively leveraging. The fact is all enterprise service buses and all sorting have kind of been, there's a place called enterpriseintegrationpatterns.com that kind of gives you patterns that are used across a wide variety of platforms, messaging, infrastructures, what have you. And there's a reason that they become patterns is because they've been done so often. Just like the GOF, for those of you who are familiar with that bit of foundation. So how does Neuron kind of tie back to EIP? So I'm not going to walk through every EIP, but I'll give you some concrete ties. So like for pipes and filters, almost one-to-one with Neuron pipelines, pretty much a one-to-one. Message router. We have a routing step into subscription conditions. Message translator. Transform step and code step. Publish subscribe channel. That's what Neuron is all about. Message bus. Again, parties, topics, and services, and the broadcast step, you have a great bus. Invalid message channel. What do I do when you have failures? Well, we have built-in things called policies. Maybe you have scatter-gather pattern. We have a split join pipeline. What about routing? Routing is built into Neuron, both in the services engine and in the pub sub system. CBR, we have tons of CBR and context-based routing. So when you go to that, you can actually go to enterpriseintegrationpartners.com, which is in no way affiliated with Neuron or any other single product, and pretty much find a solution for every one of the integration patterns within Neuron. So now, for those of you who are looking for guidance, I'm going to get into something. I might be a little heretical. I'm going to actually say some lessons learned we learned from the field and from just an awful lot of years of integration. You may disagree with these, and these may cause heartburn. These are pretty much what I've seen, so nobody else is responsible except for me. So the first part of advice I'd put is message whenever possible. Use orchestration workflow, VPM, Oslo, whatever the platform is now called that promises drag and drop Neuron when you have to. What do I mean by that? We have great pipelines, and there's a lot of great tools out there that offer drag and drop interfaces. But for maximally decoupling and for maximally getting the most agility out of any given environment when you're designing an integration, you want to think at the message level. And whenever possible, the less you can do when shuttling that message from point to point is the ideal. So, and the heavier you make the middle, the closer, the more you're going to lock yourself into kind of a rigid domain model. Now, let's roll into the second point. Most knowledge is domain specific, and the domains live on the edge. Many businesses are not about one thing. Within an enterprise environment, you have several departments. Within those departments, you're going to have various domain experts. I tend to think about integration in a lot of ways as shuttling messages or packets, rather than something like where you're moving streams. Because you're shuttling packets, it's often better to make that as general as possible at the edges, as it's flowing through what you would call the middle or the middleware, because the edge is going to be changing often, and the domain experts are the ones who know why it changes. If you take a top-down approach or a big SOA approach, what you're going to have is you're going to end up having lots and lots of meetings where you try to reconcile those edges, and what you're also going to find is over time, those edges change an awful lot. Which leads me to contracts that don't change are great. All contracts change. If you don't design for change, what you're going to end up doing is designing a constant workaround, or you're going to end up with frustration that really just digs in and causes meetings. So anticipate contract change, see what tools you have for contract change, and look in some Neuron provides many mechanisms to handle contract change. The thing I would keep in mind here, though, is recognize that no matter what your contract is, if you're using web services, at the end of the day, it's text or SOAP in most forms, unless you're using a different encoder, flowing across the wire. And at the point it's flowing across the wire, flowing through a system, it has no knowledge, nor does it care, particularly about a particular contract. So it throws me in the next one. If you're not using canonical message forms, which we find almost nobody doing, you're probably wiring services on the fly, i.e. you have different departments. They're making up different services. Those services are being created independently. There's not meetings. You're not doing top-down SOA, so you can't create canonical messages because you don't have any idea of what different departments do. So once again, it kind of goes back to the contract thing. You can have a contract for a department, but unless you take the true understanding to really drill down and create canonical forms for your business, you're going to keep ending up with contracts that change. The next one's kind of a practical one. If all you're doing is fronting a database or another resource in code, which we see a lot, consider using the bus as an endpoint. For some architects, this is just crazy talk. What I think is crazy is building a web service that queries a database when we provide all the tooling with zero code. That's what I think is crazy. Nonetheless, you'll have people insist on doing it. So if possible, and people say, well, what about just executing things from no error, there's no error checking. There's actually a lot of error checking you can put in. It'll be standard. It'll work with things like XSLT, or you can work with things like, schema validation, and it won't involve hard coding. So, no, putting the bus as the endpoint, I don't believe is crazy talk. Here's one I like a lot. It's okay to not use standards if what you're doing is not standard. They're run into places an awful lot that do things like basically web-enabled their CRUD operations. Or they, and those CRUD operations are very database specific. So they're just exposing basically their internal database with web services. Or you run into places that have a very specific business model. They have a very proprietary business, so they have a very but they get hung up on, well, we're not following WS star. There's no magic internally in following WS star. It's outstanding and should be followed when you're integrating with somebody outside of your system. But don't just automatically assume that the best thing you can do for your company internally is to wrap it in a web service because, well, it's a standard. Driving back from that, we get some pushback sometimes on using something like our messaging API. And we're not the only ones that have a messaging API, of course. Giant companies like TIBCO have proprietary messaging API. There's JMS, which is interoperable at the API, but not interoperable at the wire. There's nothing magical, regardless of the platform, about being dependent on libraries of platform. There's nothing magical about being dependent on system, service model or Neuron. Well, they're big. You're not. Or they're, yeah, well, ask the people today who found out that Oracle Client is going to be deprecated for ADO. The fact is, when you use a library, you're taking a certain level of risk. And I would argue that with a company like us, you actually have a chance of getting that risk mitigated much more easily than you would with somebody who is kind of extremely large and one customer wanting something I don't know is going to happen, change a whole lot. Finally, and this is one that I'll pray for but I very rarely see. If you've been doing this for a while, you've gone in and you've said, try for asynchronous. It often doesn't work because everybody's web-driven these days, and so request response finds itself all over the place. You find people, they try to do transactions, then they end up in a distributed environment with weird deadlocks they can't resolve. They end up with things saying they were transactional, and technically they were transactional, but then within the service they have zero control, so you can't really control transactions with a third-party system, because within there you really have zero idea what the transaction really means. So what overriding theme would I ever say for anybody developing with an ESV? So usually I try to stay away from big CS words, but I'm going to go here with an impotency, and impotency. If you design your edges to be called more than once without exploding, I think is the single most powerful helper you will have in creating your internal environment. There is no magic bullet, but if I could say that, designing for that will cause other design decisions that make you more effective in leveraging Neuron or any other system. It will make you more effective, I believe, in designing your own system. It's close to the stateless principle, which an awful lot of people have bought off on and which drives an awful lot of what we do. but I think it's even more powerful and more core to building distributed systems that will work and continue to work, regardless of error. In distributed environments, there will always be error. It just happens. There's too many pieces at play, too many places, too many things can drop. If you fall into dependency, you have a much bigger chance of surviving those errors and understanding what happened and or not being all that affected by them. There's my preaching. So for next steps, you can always go to neuronesb.com. Also, we have we can give you project assessments. We can basically tell you how Neuron can help you solve your problems. So never be shy about contacting us and saying, you know, I'd like to see you solve this one. We'd be glad to take up the challenge. And now I'm going to throw it back to Katie for any questions.
Great. Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Marty. This is a great presentation today. We did have a few questions come through. First question, is it okay to have more than one bus?
Sure.
You want to go with that, Marty? Or?
Sure. So I think you'll find a lot of companies today actually have more than one bus, typically from more than one vendor. It's not unusual for a house to have both, say, like a Java-based bus as well as a Microsoft-based bus. Some buses tend to do one or two things well and maybe not some others, while others might do those other things well. With Neuron ESB, we actually have a distributed architecture, so you can actually bridge the ESB instances together across geographies. So in essence, you could actually have a bus in LA and a bus in Chicago and actually bridge those two together. However, you could also bridge our bus together with, say, someone else's bus, perhaps like IBM using our MQ series interop, or even using our active MQ interop.
Okay, great. Next question. Is versioning really just another form of routing?
Is bridging another form of routing? It is, but it's very specific to, it's obviously very specific in our environment, it's very specific to Neuron ESB because it's not just routing some messages to a different location. It's routing messages based off rules, but also context of that message. Right? So in other words, those messages still know something about Neuron when it hits the other side. It knows how to interact with that other side. And hence they can be managed in a distributed way.
Great. Please let us know if that answers your questions or if you need any additional information or clarification. Another question that came through, why did you develop your own services hosting model?
I can take this one if you want.
Okay.
We developed a services hosting model because we felt we actually ran into a number of instances where people wanted different kinds of isolation, full process isolation like you have in IIS, but they also wanted something that's not going to be provided until like 2008 R2, which is I want a service, but I don't want it to start only on first call. In 2008 R2, I think they're going to call it auto start when they provide it. That idea has a long history already in the Java world. That's how servlets and things like that operated from day one. We kind of felt that functionality should be standard and normal.
Right. There's also some other reasons as well, right? I mean, having our own service hosting model is advantageous because then we can tie our own registry into that repository of data, right? So with that, then we can start doing things like interception, mediation, also policy enforcement, things of that nature.
Great. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to type them in at this time. And in the meantime, I'm going to click through a few of our polling questions, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback. Let's take our first question. Was this content helpful for your business? Yes or no? Thank you for everyone who's answering. Give everyone just a few more seconds. Question 2. Please rate the presentation content. Excellent, good, poor. Thank you everyone for responding. And last question. Would you like us to schedule a follow-up, yes or no? Okay, great. Again, thank you everyone for interacting. If there are no further questions at this time, which there doesn't seem to be, we want to thank Christian and Marty again for this great presentation. I would also like to apologize for any audio difficulties that we had throughout the presentation. We did record today's presentation, and we will be pushing that out, and hopefully that will be able to be a little more audible than the live version. Also, I would like to mention that today's BiteSized SOA webcast is the third webcast in a series of 3. The first 2 BiteSized SOA webcast presentations can be downloaded from Neudesic.com's homepage. I will also include these links in the follow-up email for today's webcast. If you have any further questions about this presentation or BiteSized SOA series, please feel free to email Marty, Christian, or myself. Again, thank you everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webcast. Everyone is now free to disconnect.